So, but in general, do you think there's any difference between the statutes that say false statement and the statutes that say false and misleading? Because it sounds to me that would argue that when it says false, that includes misleading statements in context. So is there any difference?
We are not taking the position that the word misleading does no work in statutes in which it appears. We think there is some overlap between these concepts, as I understood my friend to agree. But when we say something has to be false in context, we mean it has to state, the statement itself has to state a false message. It has to convey a false meaning directly, not lead the listener down a path perhaps to a foreseeable conclusion that additional information might have obviated. But here, when petitioner says, I borrowed $110,000 in response to what was essentially a question from the FDIC saying, do you owe $269,000? That is directly conveying through his statement that he only owed that amount.
But isn't what you said?
I was going to say it's tough to parse, it seems to me, in a lot of cases. I'm not making these up. I think these are in the case. But, a police officer pulls a person over, thinks he's drunk, says, have you been drinking? And the person says, I've had one cocktail, when in fact he had one cocktail and 4 glasses of wine. I mean, is that treated differently under the false statute that says just false and the statute that says false and misleading? I can see that being misleading, but I'm not sure it would qualify as false under the literal meaning of the word.
I don't think those would be treated differently under those two statutes. I believe that is a false statement because a reasonable juror could find in context so that when an officer pulls somebody over and asks, have you been drinking, they're asking for a complete account of how much you've been drinking. And when the person says, I had just one cocktail,
I didn't say
implies.
Just. You didn't say just. In my hypothetical, it's I had a cocktail.
I'm sorry, I was repeating.
Or I had one cocktail.
Right. And I think in context, a reasonable juror could find that the officer was asking for a complete account of how much the person had to drink, given that the officer was clearly trying to determine whether or not they were inebriated and could not drive. And that's the kind of surrounding circumstance that we think is relevant here.